The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everyone, I'm Rick from RioSense, and thanks for joining us on our experiments with wine. And so we're here at Windchaser Winery. This is my buddy Dave. He is the owner and winemaker here at Windchaser. He's been here for about 5 years. He's located in Berkeley, and he's got a really cool setup here as an urban winemaker, but he gets his grapes from, mostly with Sonoma County.
Mendocino, kind of focused on Anderson Valley.
Anderson Valley, okay. And, before we dive into things, I want to plug us on social media. Follow us, follow RioSense on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And Dave, you can follow him on Instagram on windchaserwine.co.
Windchaser Wine Co.
Windchaser Wine Co. So make sure you get on there. All right, so as I mentioned, Dave is the owner of Windchaser. He has a great background in winemaking even before he started Windchaser. And what I love about Dave is that he makes wines that he likes. And he also has a certain style that you may not be aware of. He calls it unfined and unfiltered.
Yep, everything's unfined and unfiltered.
And maybe you could talk a little bit about that and tell us a little bit about yourself and this awesome winery.
Thank you. Welcome everyone. So yeah, I've been in the space for 5 years. Started the brand in 2015, so 7 years going now. The main question, probably the big question that everybody asks with a warehouse space in a winery in the middle of Berkeley, here in the Gilman district, is where do the grapes come from? Anderson Valley is kind of where I focus my fruit sourcing. A couple other areas in Mendocino, around the Mendocino Ridge, and then a couple things up in El Dorado in the Sierra Foothills. Bring the grapes down here. We have a unique block here in West Berkeley where there are 5 different wineries all on this one block, making lots of different styles of wine, and tasting rooms are open on the weekends. What we're going to do today, we're going to focus on Anderson Valley. We have 3 different aromatic white wines from the same vineyard. We have a Chardonnay, a Pinot Gris, and a Gewürztraminer. And we have multiple vintages or verticals of each of these wines to be able to test and get data points.
That's right.
There we go.
We're going to look for data.
So yeah, unfined and unfiltered, certainly not unique to me, but it is something that I do across the board as far as winemaking is concerned. All my wines are unfined, which means I'm not adding any egg whites, bentonite, isinglass, I think it's called, which is a product that's made from fish bladders. So
appetizing.
Yeah. So that makes my wine vegan, though,
that's cool.
Which is kind of a funny thing. Anyway, unfiltered as well. I'm not pushing the wine through filter pads, and what I think happens when you filter the wine is you're stripping something, whether it's aromatics, whether it's flavor, whether it's texture, out of the wine. And I think, I'm trying to get as much of all of those things in the wine as possible. So I don't know why I would want to strip them out.
You want the character of the wine to shine through.
Sure, and just to be, transparent, I think that there are certainly a lot of more experienced and more educated winemakers who would argue that filtering doesn't do any stripping of those things to the wine. But when you see what filter pads look like before and after the wine has been pushed through them, I think it's pretty obvious that something's being left behind. So. Anyway, that's kind of one of the things. The other thing that's worth mentioning in my winemaking, they're all native or spontaneous fermentations. I do not add commercial yeasts or enzymes or nutrients to the fermentations. We just let the grapes ferment with the native yeast from the vineyard that's on the skins, as well as whatever kind of funky yeasts
Are in the air.
that are in the air here in Berkeley, with a brewery a block away and other wineries in the block, and then of course fruit coming from different areas of California. There's certainly a native wind chaser yeast in the fall around here. So
very cool.
So there you go. So that's kind of the overview of this place.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Dave. That was really cool. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to, as Dave mentioned, we're going to taste. Oh, yeah, we will be tasting.
Yeah, we have to taste. I'm sorry.
But we will be testing too. We'll be testing.
I know it's early for you amateurs, but it's
never too early for wine. So we're going to start off by testing different vintages of the Chardonnay.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. So the sample tube is, let's start there. This is the 2020 Chardonnay, which is still in tank. What we're going to do is taste, we'll test, the 2020, the 20, which is still in tank, has not been bottled, so technically not a finished wine.
Okay.
Then we'll try the 19 and the 18, which are bottled and have had time to rest in the bottle, and we'll see if there's any difference.
Yeah.
Go for it.
All right. So yeah, ultimately, we want to see if there is a difference in viscosity, and so that's what we're trying to do now. Can you use viscosity as a tool to differentiate very similar types of wine? And so, viscosity you can think of as kind of like the texture of the wine. Sometimes a wine has a buttery feel. Sometimes a wine is much more crisp, and those are all viscosity related. And so, yeah, let's see if we could tell the difference.
Just some other, while you're doing that, and since you mentioned stainless steel and oak, and those are different vessels that the wines are aged in, and certainly have effects on the texture and the flavor profiles of the finished product. I'm pretty much doing barrel fermentations across the board for the whites, even things like Pinot Gris and Gewürztraminer, which maybe you're more traditionally done in a crisper style and done in stainless steel. I really like to try and create texture on the palate, and I think that the aging in oak helps with that. Also, everything goes through full malolactic fermentation, which is the secondary fermentation. First is the sugar conversion, converts sugar to alcohol, and second is malolactic, which converts lactic acid to malic acid, or the other way around. No, lactic to malic, yes. So anyway, and that also will have an effect on the texture in the wine.
So what I've done now is I've loaded the 2021 Chardonnay. 2020, sorry. Into our pipettes. Our pipettes are disposable, which is nice. You don't have to clean them. There's a barrel and a plunger. Basically, you just put them together like this, and then you aspirate up whatever you want to test. So really quick and easy. It doesn't require any special training. You can get going on your viscosity testing in 5 minutes.
Even a winemaker could do that.
Even a winemaker could do that. I didn't want to say that, Dave, but I'm glad you mentioned that. Okay, so right now it's doing the test. I'm going to do triplicates so that we can get a nice average of viscosity.
So I have a novice wine question.
Yes.
Why do you pick oak barrels as opposed to other types of wood? Is there a benefit out of it?
Well, to be quite honest with you, that's just what. Yes, there's different. I don't know the not lanolins. Lanolins. There's different types of wood have different porosity, and so I think that over time they just figured out that oak is what works. There are other types of wood that are used, I do not use any others. There are different countries of origin. There's American oak, French oak, Hungarian oak. I mostly use French oak barrels. That said, almost all the barrels in the winery here are used barrels. I don't use a lot of new oak in my wine. I'm trying to let the fruit be the kind of the dominant flavor profile in the wine, not toast or chocolate and secondary flavors that you get from new barrels. And it also depends on the wine. Like, you know, a Cabernet, I might, if there's 3 barrels of Cabernet, maybe 1 barrel might be new and the other 2 would be neutral, having been used 4 or 5 years and no longer giving the wine those oaky flavors. Pinot Noir, if there's 10 barrels, maybe 1 of them is new, you know? So like a lot more oak in a Cab, a lot less oak in a Pinot Noir, no new oak in any of the whites. The whites are all well-used, neutral barrels. So when you say triplicate, is the machine just doing it 3 times for you, or you don't have to use 3 different samples? Sorry.
No, that's a great question. Our system is based off of microfluidics, and so we could use
I assumed microfluidics.
We use very small sample volume, and so we can get a lot done with very little.
Gotcha.
And so I just did 3 measurements. Measurements all came out very consistent. 3.47 centipoi, 3.49 centipoi. Then this last one also 3.49 centipoi. For reference, water is 1 centipoi. And so this is a bit more viscous than water. And so the average is 3.49 for the 2020 vintage. Cool. And so yeah, let's check out to see if there's a change in the 2021. So that came out really nice and consistent. Squeeze that in there.
You want to pour this?
Yeah, you can pour it in here.
Oh, you know, are you sure?
I do need to taste it to make sure it's, you know.
I was going to make it easier for you to get your little sample.
Oh, yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, we can pour that in there.
Sorry, put that straight there.
Ooh.
Red cup out of the way.
Okay. I'm going to use the same pipette. I could do that because I know that the different wines are, what we say, they're miscible with each other. They won't react and crash out. So that is something that you may want to be careful with if you are, for example, testing proteins or anything like that. You want to make sure that if you are doing one sample after the next, you want to make sure that they're miscible with each other. And if they are, then you don't have to even clean out in between samples. You could just run one to flush out the previous sample and then continue running until you're done with your sample volume. Okay, start this. So this is 2019 of the Chardonnay from Anderson Valley.
I think it's good. I mean, as much as I don't know what you're talking about, it's very interesting still because I know the wines pretty well.
Yeah.
And I pour them all on a regular basis in the tasting room. And, you know, like if one weekend we're pouring the 17 Chardonnay, a weekend or 2 later we'll pour the 18, a weekend or 2 later we'll pour the 19, and kind of check in on them.
Yeah.
And people who are regulars kind of have favorites. So like the 2017 is known as the funky Chardonnay.
The funky Chardonnay.
So it is going to be interesting. And the 18 definitely has a much more kind of yeast forward character. But it's the same grapes from the same field, made by the same guy, you know, in the same place several years in a row. And yet each wine is really different and unique to itself.
It has its own personality. Oh, look at this. Interesting.
So what other measurements do you take in your wine making process?
So I am kind of a low-tech guy, in case you haven't noticed. The stuff that I work on is basically bricks during harvest, which is the measurement of the sugar in the wine. I measure that through fermentation to see when the fermentation is finished or when the wine is dry. pH, TA. Those are pretty common, and then this time of the year, we test the level of malic acid in the wine because we want to see where that secondary fermentation is. There's multiple companies that you can send, a tube to, and they can do all the analysis for you. There's some stuff that we can do in the house here. I still like to do paper chromatography for malics, just because it's fun. It doesn't smell great, but it's fun. And
What's it smell?
Yeah,
like?
it's the solution is just super toxic. I don't know what the name of it is, but it's nasty.
Can you pour me a little bit of this guy?
All right, so we're gonna go to the 18 shard.
If you guys don't mind, it's delicious.
Oh, I don't mind. What was the results on that?
I'm not going to
He's
say.
really
I'm
being
sorry.
cagey about it. I wasn't expecting this.
You gave the 21, so I was thinking...
Baseline. That's your baseline.
That's it. Okay.
That's your baseline. Okay. This is the
18.
Oh, 2018. Okay.
18.
So what do you guys think? Do you think there is a difference? Do you think they're about the same before you see my results? What do you think, Dave? Do you think there might be a difference?
I'm really hoping so, to be honest with you. I have no idea, but I assume that even just based on the fact that the alcohol content of each of the vintages is different, I would assume that the viscosity of the wine is going to be different.
Oh, okay.
But again, you are
really
not
cool.
talking to the scientist in the...
What's the alcohol content of the 2020? That's
2020. I'm going to have to go back to and find out.
That's okay.
Because it's not bottled, so I have it written down somewhere.
No
But
worries, we can get that.
13.8% for the 2019. 13.8.
Okay.
13.7 for the. I don't know if these are. And 13.5 for the 17.
Oh, they're all pretty consistent.
So they're not too far off. I would guess that the 20 might be the highest of the bunch.
Interesting. Okay. And you know that just from your experience with the
Just
wine?
based on what the sugars were when picked. What a lot of wineries will do is the higher the sugars get while the grapes are hanging on the vine, the sugars are going up as the fruit's ripening the whole time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And while the sugars are going up, the acid in the wine is going down. So the balancing point is finding the day to pick the grapes where you've got the sugar and the acid that you want in the fruit. Some people will let the sugars get really high to get a lot of physiological ripeness and flavor in the grapes, but then water back once you're in the winery to simply add water to the must and tartaric acid to balance out with where they want the end product to be. That's not what I do. I want to pick the fruit at the point where it's got the balance of the acid and the fruit and the flavor profile, but I don't want to have to add any water or to add anything else to the wines back here at the winery. Minimal intervention is kind of the term that I like to throw around when it comes to that philosophy. So in the wines that are on the table here, there's nothing in them but grapes and a little bit of sulfur that acts as a preservative for the wine. Other wineries, you could test the same grapes, would have maybe been picked a week or two later and been a higher sugar, and then the winery would have watered them back. And so it'd be interesting, again, to see how the viscosity of the wine between nothing but grapes and a little sulfur and all the multitude of other products that,
Mhm.
that wineries can add to fermentations.
Well, the verdict is in. There is a difference.
All right.
Okay, so as I mentioned, the 2020 came out to about 3.49 centipoi. 2019 was 3.67 centipoi. So, about 0.2 centipoi higher. And the 2018 is coming in at around 3.72, so it's even higher. So do you think that might be a reflection of maybe more sugar content
Well, it's so again, if there's a winemaker out there, they're probably like, "Hey, dummy, it's this." But I mean, that's the opposite of what I would have thought, because the alcohols are getting, as we go back through the vintages, the alcohol's getting lower and lower and lower, and yet the viscosity's gotten higher and higher.
It's gotten a little higher and
So
higher.
could it just be from what happens to the juice in the bottle?
Something's happening to the juice in the bottle, because, I mean, as we see here, the viscosity did change. I mean, it's visually, they would look exactly the same.
Did we do 3?
So
We did
Rick,
2019 and 18.
viscosity question for you. So you said like 3.4, 3.6, 3.7. How significant are the 0.2 changes?
That's a good question. In a physical sense, there's not much of a difference, but because our palates are so sensitive to, variations in viscosity, the 2018 may have a more buttery feel compared to the 2020 because of the lower in viscosity. So it's really hard to say in terms of, how a person will engage with the wine. Will they be able to detect the difference?
Right.
On our instruments, we can detect the difference. So we know there is a difference, but if you're looking for a certain mouthfeel, for example, you may want to make your viscosity maybe even higher.
Right.
If you want viscosity, or if you want something that's a little bit more crisp, you may want to start looking at lower viscosity. So this is how you could use viscosity. It's kind of like a systematic way to produce your wines the way you want them.
All right, 17.
Okay,
We've got it. We might as well try.
let's do it. So you say 2017 is the funky?
So 17 was known as the funky Chardonnay, yes.
It's bubbly too.
And hence the funky.
The funk.
Bring on the funk.
Kind of a funny story in a self-humiliating kind of way, but so
Self-humiliating.
So this was, I've been working with this fruit for several years already, by 2017, and 17, one of the things I did a little bit differently is I bottled the wine earlier than I normally do with the Chardonnay, that is. So normally the Chardonnay bottles in the fall, the 15, the 16, the 18, the 19, the 20, all bottled in the fall, 17 bottled kind of mid-summer, early summer.
Okay.
And usually when the wine's bottled, kind of goes back into the warehouse storage, sits for a couple months, and at least 6 weeks before I'll even pull a bottle out and check on it. And took a bottle home, I think around the 6 week mark, opened the bottle in the kitchen, poured some in the glass, and it just kind of almost fizzed.
It fizzed. Interesting.
And I almost had a heart attack, and my wife said, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "Oh, I got it." But so I tasted, and what's it taste like? It's delicious. So wait a couple more weeks go by, bring another bottle home, try again, hoping that it's no fizz. Same scenario in the kitchen. What's wrong? I messed up this wine. Not only that, but I made twice as much of it this year.
Oh no! But
anyway,
it was delicious.
And well, how's it taste? It's delicious. So I mean, I had the wine. I had to start serving it. So first, taste a couple of weekends in the tasting room. I go through this long song and dance about how I've got this flawed, wine, and people are looking at me like you're the worst salesperson I've ever heard. And
You're not gonna like it, but you
yeah,
might want to try
you know,
it. Just give it a shot.
Yeah. Like I don't know what I did wrong. And everyone loved the wine. I mean, sure enough, like people were buying the wine, and one of my kind of regulars finally just pulled me aside and said, "Dave, you just need to shut up and pour the wine." So anyway, then it just became the freaky shard, the funky shard, and oddly, it sold it out all out. So
no more funky shard, huh?
I guess, given some of the wine that's out in the market these days, my level of funky was not quite
That's funky.
as funky as a lot of stuff out there. So
You are in Berkeley, so it can get pretty funky.
That's
here.
true. It's true.
Have you had any other bubbly shards?
So I get there is a common theme in some of my white wines where there is definitely some effervescence and kind of dancing happiness on the palate, and I think that is partly the low sulfur additions. The wine is basically still kind of alive, and maybe even just a hint of malic activity still, which can kind of give that. I mean, it's by no means bubbles or sparkling or anything. It's not even frizzante, but I mean, is this glass clean?
Yeah.
Very interesting. The 2017
Funky Chardonnay.
This came out very similar to the 2020. It's about 3.4 centipoi.
So I wonder if it's the air bubble.
Yeah, because you know when I aspirated it up, I noticed there were more air bubbles that were generated in the pipette compared to 2020, 19, and 18. But I don't know. But viscosity wise, it is different from all the other ones.
What does dissolved CO2? Was it dissolved CO2?
Mm-hmm.
How would that affect? Because isn't there could be dissolved CO2 that if you shake it up and
Mm-hmm.
and get rid of that, would post and pre change the viscosity of the aeration of it or whatever you do?
That's a great question because CO2 will want to go into its gaseous state pretty quickly once that pressure is removed.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a bit difficult to measure a bubbly substance because the bubbles will interfere with the viscosity measurement. And so you can measure it once all the CO2 has been converted to gas. And then you can measure it that way with more consistency. But to answer your question, it's hard to do the measurement upon first opening it.
Well, we have the same issue like during fermentation when we have samples. A lot of times, if it's already if the juice sample, for instance, say grab grapes off the vine, crush them up, and we want to just see what the TA, what the pH, what the sugars are to help us determine when to pick, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you let that sample sit in your car for a couple of days, it starts fermenting, and then you send it to the lab, it's already going. I think you're not going to get the same analysis as the juice, right? So anyway, I have one more thing that I think we should do now, though.
Yeah, okay.
With that knowledge is, let me grab a sample straight from a barrel of the 21 Chardonnay.
Okay.
Which is very likely still got a little malolactic activity going in it. And then between,
see what it looks like.
Because that, if it's anywhere near the 20 and the 17, then I think you'll have a common theme.
Yeah.
All right,
check it
so
out.
I will be right back.
Also, I mean, you could see there is a bit of a difference visually. Yeah. Like this is the 2017. It has a little bit more complexity, I guess, in visualness, whereas this is very crisp and
Yeah,
clear.
that's a big difference when you hold them side by side.
So yeah, I mean, there's definitely something going on,
There's
and
more legs on the.
much more legs.
There is, yeah.
And so, just a reminder, viscosity is actually it's a reflection of the molecular interaction that's going on in the fluid. And so, what we're looking at is, how are the different molecules interacting? Does age change that molecular interaction? The sugar content change that molecular interaction? And we have a question about, bricks and wine viscosity. maybe Dave could say a little bit about bricks. I don't know very much about bricks other than, use them for building, but that's not what that's not the right bricks for this one.
So that's a great question, and funny enough, before we started this, we were kind of touched on it just a little bit, and this might be a good time for us to try. So that is 2021 Chardonnay, and again, this is the same field, all 5 vintages or 4 vintages in a row. And here, let's do this. Oops,
yeah, you can do a brick test on that.
So while you're checking that, I can measure the actual bricks of this juice sample.
No bubbles. Very different.
Which one's that one?
2021 Chard. Out of the barrel. Straight out of the barrel.
Here's a little factoid for you, or useless trivia. But when wine is fermenting in the barrel, it makes a sound. And there are 2 fairly unique sounds that fermenting juice makes. So with some experience, you can literally put your ear to the bung, and you can
really
we
you
just
could hear something.
Oh yeah, so like a lot of times this time of the year, you're just aimlessly walking around the winery and listening to barrels, and you can hear the difference between primary fermentation, which is kind of like a fizzing inside of a Coke can kind of a sound, versus malolactic fermentation, which is again secondary, right? And that's more kind of like snap, crackle, pop.
No kidding. That is so cool.
And it's so like you can go and you can just kind of listen, and if you don't hear anything, you kind of get a pretty good feeling that the wine is finished. But if you can just stick your ear there and you hear this activity, then you know something's going on, and you don't really have to think too much more about it at that stage.
That is really cool. And making wine is it's such an art, and it's like it's where art and science kind of come together, because you do a lot of science, but at the same time you're adding a very unique artistic impression on it.
I mean, so nobody yells at me. Yeah, I don't have any, I don't have any formal education in winemaking. I barely took science and chemistry in school. So the bricks of this sample is negative 2.5 bricks. It started somewhere in the 23 range, and then through fermentation, this is to the point. And there is a calculation where you can convert that to the potential alcohol, but I don't know that.
Okay.
Anyway, so how do we answer this guy's question?
That is it. Yeah.
Is there a winemaker in the house? Sorry.
So how much longer until this 2021 chart is ready? How long does it spend in this phase?
It depends on the winery, and depends what you're trying to do. Some wineries make wine based on marketing schedules and wine club schedules and when you've got to sell the wine. I don't have that issue. So to me, it's more of kind of when the wine is ready. Generally speaking, almost all of my wine is and what we say is the barrels are empty by the next harvest. Okay. So fruit comes in August, September, ferments. Generally, I'll do a bottling in April for some of the earlier things, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Gris sometimes, Rosé, things like that. And then, again, bottling in August. Occasionally, certain things will get held over and bottled after the next harvest, sometimes Syrah. Cabernet, I do make a little bit of Cabernet, and that's more like 2 full years.
Okay.
But most of my things most of my stuff is bottled within 10 to 11 months. I was going to go back because you were talking about color while I was grabbing the sample. Yeah. Oxidation also plays a huge part in the aging of wine in the bottle and how the wine.
Okay.
And so older wines are typically going to have a darker hue
because of the oxidation process.
Yeah. Which is interesting that I think the 17 is maybe the lightest of that whole lineup of ours of Chardonnays, color wise.
This is the 17.
I felt like the 17 was pretty darn light.
And then this is the
Yeah, they're
this
pretty
is
close.
the 19. But there, you can see there is a little bit of a difference in kind of the clarity. This is a lot more
That's
funky.
the funk.
That's the funk. And we have systematically determined it is funky. All right, so your 2021 out of the barrel, it is different in viscosity. It averaged around 3.57. So that's right in between your 2020 and 2019.
So it blows whatever theory I had going there is completely shot.
But I think it's a reflection of, like you said, you could have the same grape, the same person, cultivating the grapes, but if you pick it 1 year to the next, there's going to be some kind of change to it. And I think that adds to the really uniqueness of wines. You don't get the same thing every time, even though it's the same grape, same place.
Yeah. Or, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with that at all, and that's certainly the way that we're doing things. And I'll say we as in like this whole area of winemakers in the neighborhood. Whereas if you go to a much larger scale winery, their objective is to make that Chardonnay taste the exact same every year, and it's so that when you go to the grocery store and you grab brand X, you're going to get your oaky buttery Chardonnay if that's what you're into. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you're into, but that's not what you're going to find here necessarily. Let's try something else though, because now I'm actually now I'm like intrigued.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Let's go to Gewürztraminer.
All right, let's do the Gewürz. And can you tell us a little bit of what a Gewürz is like, kind of like in a classical sense versus a Chardonnay?
Did you guys have some wine?
You guys
we had the 2017.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's try some Gewürz.
So while we're doing that, a question here: how is resolution important to wine? So I'm assuming like the number of decimal points you could go to determine how they're different. That's a great question because it really depends on what you're looking for. I think, like what Dave said, if you are a larger producer of wine and you want to keep everything the same year after year after year, you could use viscosity to hone in on that particular viscosity that reflects the mouthfeel that you're looking for. And so that is something that's the art part of the winemaking, I think. Once you have this flavor profile that you like, now you could use scientific instrumentation to replicate that. Another question we have: what is your favorite wines, everyone? If it's liquid, I like it.
Well, that audience participation time.
What do you guys think?
Okay. Like my favorite wine here, or just in general?
In general.
In general, I usually like a nice Cabernet.
I feel like I'm very uncultured because I like red blends.
No, those are fine.
So it's not very
Those are
picky.
some of my
Whatever
favorites,
the mix is, sometimes it just works out.
Okay,
very well.
while we're paying attention, 2020 Gewürztraminer.
All right.
And just to go back again, this is basically like a 280-acre ranch up in Anderson Valley, where I get 5 different varieties and I make 7 different wines out of.
Wow.
So it's kind of, Anderson Valley is a long way away, but at least when I can go to one ranch and sample 5 different I make 14 different wines altogether. So Gewürz runs the spectrum of sweet to dry.
Okay.
And this is going to be, I think, it probably might be the most interesting of the 3, but we'll see. Sweet to dry. Sweet being dessert style or late harvest, where the sugars go really, really high.
Okay.
And then you have a very syrupy, almost viscosity in the wine.
Can we do a brick test on this?
We can certainly do a bricks test, but but mine is on the dry side.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right. So it's
I may not.
a little bit more in kind of goes into kind of Riesling territory. this grape is known for having some spiciness to it. Even when they're dry, there's a lot of fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And the combination of alcohol and the fruit can sometimes have the perception of sweetness.
Okay.
So like your first kind of thought is, oh, it's still kind of sweet, right? And I don't know what the actual sugar would have been good information to have. Maybe next time we'll get some more wine data. But like, what's the grams per liter of sugar in each bottle would be interesting to also correlate with the alcohol and with the viscosity.
Viscosity, yeah. I mean, they all kind of mesh together. Viscosity plays a big role in how you perceive the wine. Bricks tell you sugar content.
Ooh, I was going to measure the bricks.
And like you said, when it's the right time to pick. If you're looking for a certain brick range, to pick the wine.
Side note, not so scientific, but Thai food, Indian food, Gewürztraminer goes very well with that kind of spicier kind of cuisine. It's definitely a fun wine to have with that food.
So I have a wine enthusiast friend, and he said whenever we're describing wines, instead of calling them sweet, we should be calling them fruit forward. Is that something you heard? Is that how you would describe fruit forward wines?
I think that's basically what I was just trying to say to you, as far as like your initial reaction was that it's sweet, and instead of just saying, actually, no, sir, you're wrong, it's dry. You know what I mean? Like that's what I think that's where your buddy's going with that. So this is negative 2.8 bricks. Or negative 2. Well, we'll say we're gonna stick with 2.8. And that is the 2020 Rick.
And your wines are not as fruit forward, or are they more fruit?
No, I would say my wines are fairly fruit driven. To be smarty pants.
Fruit driven. I like that. No, sir, it's fruit driven.
Yeah, I mean, it's just because, I mean, again, we started this whole conversation like the part of the mission for me in my 18 years of winemaking and even longer in the wine industries, to take out some of the intimidation factors and snobby factors and just bring it down a notch and make it more accessible for people. And asking questions like, oh, I've got a stupid question. No, it's not a stupid question. It's just a question. Let's talk about it, and let's just remember that it is just grape juice. It's you can't take it all too seriously.
That's right. Well, on that note, viscosity of this was a 2021?
2020.
2020 is very similar to the viscosity. It's 3.6. It's very similar to the viscosity of your 2021 shard.
Let's jump right in and find out the 21 which is from a barrel sample.
Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. I think we're running out of time. So we're going to do this one test, and then we'll wrap it up. So any more questions, please send them on along.
Let's get rid of this. I don't get confused.
You can take that home later.
Yeah, can I?
Don't worry. Wine is not in any shortage around here.
So this is the 2021.
While you do that, I'll test this.
So the sedimentation that we see on the bottom of the barrels, is that part of the unfiltered?
Actually, that's why. Thanks for bringing me back. I saved the bottom of my glass from the 2017 Chardonnay sample, and you can actually see the tartrates in the bottom of the glass. Before I was in the wine industry, I was in the restaurant business for quite a few years. and I've had to go to tables who thought that they were complaining that there was glass in their bottle of wine, and demanding their money back. And I'll never forget the first time it ever happened was over a bottle of Newton unfiltered Chardonnay at a restaurant I worked at in New York City. And like, I thought I was being really helpful and explaining to these people like the whole what are wine diamonds, and they just thought I was being a wine snob and wanted their money back. Anyway, so yeah, 20-something years later, here we are still explaining what tartrates are in the bottom. And that is basically, if the wine was filtered, you're not going to probably get the tartrates bonding in the bottle and dropping out in the bottle. That would have happened before the wine is bought. Because normally what you do if you're filtering for white wines is you'll do some fining process where you add, again, with different products, but bentonite is a clay-based product that you mix up and then dump into the tank and then all that bentonite sinks to the bottom. I believe it's bonds with proteins. That helps to clarify the wine, and they rack the wine off of that stuff and then filter it. So there's a lot of manipulation and kind of beating up of the grapes in that process, which I don't do. Anyway, the point being that the tartrates would drop out in the tank, and then you wrap the juice off of that so that you don't have it in the bottle again. And negative 2.9 again.
They're about the same.
They're the exact. That's weird. So much for not being consistent on purpose.
All data is good data, even if it doesn't make sense.
All right. You're learning.
All right.
What did you call them? Wine diamonds?
Wine diamonds.
I'm gonna use that.
You're gonna.
I
Yeah.
like that.
Another little trick for you is Gewürztraminer is a bit of a mouthful, and people again trying to get out of the intimidation. I'm giving you all my tricks,
All your secrets.
But yeah, just since the kids like to shorten everything these days, just shorten to Gewürz, and then people think you know what you're talking about.
I've never ordered it because I couldn't pronounce it, so that was the only thing holding me back.
It's funny. They're 2020 and 21 are very, very similar. 2020 was about 3.62. 2021 is coming in at around 3.64. So it's almost indistinguishable.
And this was the same as the 2018 or 19 shard, roughly the 3.6, right?
Yes, it's more similar to the 2019 than any other shard.
And the alcohol is almost 0.5% higher in this than it is in the Chardonnay, and yet the viscosity is the same.
Yeah, there's something about the grapes and the molecules and how they're interacting. Could also be, I mean, are they in different barrels, different types of?
No, I mean they're
the grapes,
pretty consistent. Yeah.
Okay. All right. One last question here: does the Microvis have any temperature control? Yes. There's a separate, it looks like a little oven that's Peltier controlled, so it's very stable and very fast to reach your desired temperature. And the temperature range is 18C to 50C. There's no other questions. I'd like to thank Dave. This has been fun.
Yeah,
this has been awesome.
Thank you, Dave.
I've learned so much, and what could be better than hanging out with you and having your amazing wine?
Yeah.
All right,
Drinking it.
drinking it. Let's do it. I'll have some Gewürz.
All right.
Hey, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Happy
Cheers.
holidays.
Fun.